I'm from the future. I came here in a time machine that you invented. Now I need your help to get back to the year 1980.
Everybody dreams about traveling through time at least once. And anybody who lived through Hollywood's golden era has seen Back to the Future at least once in their life. The box office phenomenon of 1985, a pop culture icon that audiences are still revisiting nearly 40 years later. But the story behind this movie is every bit as crazy as its time machine. Last-minute decisions nearly sent the whole film in a completely different direction, and details that millions of viewers have watched over and over again without almost anyone knowing why they were there in the first place. So today, we're turning the clock back a little, heading back to Hill Valley, back to the DeLorean, and back to this classic film to uncover the 20 weirdest facts about Back to the Future, the things we may have been missing all these years. Fact 20. The whole movie began with one strange question about a father. What do you think the idea for one of the greatest science fiction movies of all time should come from another movie? A fear about the future. But in the case of Back to the Future, the idea was oddly ordinary. Bob Gale saw his father's high school yearbook and suddenly thought, if the two of them were both 17, would they actually be friends? It sounds small, maybe even a little strange, but to me, that is one of the most touching behind-the-scenes truths in this whole film. Maybe because my father and I were never the kind who could talk about everything. And that is exactly where this movie lands, right in the heart. It is not just about time travel. It is about a son getting thrown backward into the past, then seeing his parents as real people for the first time, confused, young, and full of mistakes, just like the rest of us. That is something Hollywood at its best always knew how to do: take one family worry and turn it into movie magic. The only thing is, from a beautiful idea to an actual film, the road ahead was not smooth at all. And that is exactly what I'm about to get into next. Fact 19. This script was rejected 44 times before it became a legend. Hollywood loves to say it celebrates new ideas. I've heard that my whole life. But when it came to Back to the Future, it got brushed off so badly it still irritates me. 44 times. That is how many times this script got rejected. And the reasons sound awfully familiar. Time travel movies are hard to sell. The story was too sweet, not rebellious enough, not messy enough to compete with what the market wanted at that time. Some places even thought the Marty and his mother storyline was too sensitive. That is what I have always found both funny and bitter about Hollywood. They are very good at smelling trends, but a lot of the time they are slow to recognize the heart of a movie. Back to the Future did not fit neatly into any box. It was not exactly a teen movie, not exactly cold science fiction, and it did not look like the raunchy comedies that were making money back then either. And then I think of Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling's first book was also rejected by 12 publishers before Bloomsbury finally picked it up. Same lesson, different arena. Sometimes an entire system can get something very, very wrong before it later turns into an icon. And with Back to the Future, that long string of rejections was only the warm-up. When the movie finally got the green light, the real trouble was still waiting ahead. This time it was the title. Fact 18. Back to the Future nearly drowned under the title Spaceman from Pluto. Just imagine walking into a theater. In 1985, the lights go down. The music starts, and instead of seeing the familiar title, Back to the Future on the screen, you get Spaceman from Pluto. It sounds more like some late-night B-movie on television than the title of a film that would live across generations. And that almost happened. Sid Sheinberg, the head of Universal at the time, did not like the word future. He believed audiences would not be interested in a movie with that word in the title. So he suggested changing it to Spaceman from Pluto, built around the joke, where Marty pretends to be an alien to scare George. And that was not all. He also wanted to change the famous line, "I'm Darth Vader" from the planet Vulcan, so it would fit that new title idea. The second I hear that, I can already feel half the rhythm of the film getting cheapened. What I have always loved is the way Steven Spielberg handled it. He did not slam his fist on the table. He did not make a scene. He simply sent back a memo thanking Sheinberg for the great joke, as if everyone understood it was never meant seriously. A beautiful move. Soft, but just sharp enough to make the other side quietly back off. Funny to think about it, sometimes the fate of a classic movie can hang on something as ridiculous as a title. And once the real title was finally saved, the filmmakers still had another sensitive issue to deal with. Let's get to Fact 17. Fact 17. One joke about Reagan was enough to make the whole crew hold its breath. There are some things only Hollywood could come up with. A fun adventure movie about a kid, a mad scientist, and a car that moves through time had to tiptoe around a single joke about the sitting president. Everybody remembers that scene now. Marty says Ronald Reagan is the president in 1985, and Doc Brown freezes because in his mind, Reagan is still just a movie actor. Today, people laugh because the line is so charming. But at that exact time, it was not just a funny line. It pointed at a real man sitting in the White House, and the crew knew very well they were joking about a real political symbol of America. What I love about that detail is how old-fashioned American it feels. Back then, Hollywood was still mischievous enough to poke at the right spot, but seasoned enough to know when it had to be careful. And then the nicest turn came later. According to what Bob Gale later said, Reagan was not angry at all. Quite the opposite. He liked the movie, liked the joke, and even quoted, "Where we're going, we don't need roads," in his State of the Union address in 1986. I have always thought that was a beautiful ending. The whole crew gets nervous over one line, and the person being joked about ends up smiling the widest. But in the end, worrying about outside reactions was still the easy part. The real battle on this movie, as usual with Hollywood, came from something far more brutal: the schedule, the hours, and the limits of the human body. Fact 16. By day, it was a sitcom. By night, it was a time machine. For a stretch of time, Michael J. Fox was basically living two lives in one day. By day, he was Alex P. Keaton on Family Ties. At night, he raced over to Universal to become Marty McFly. It sounds like one of those stories people tell at fan events for fun. But when you look at his actual schedule, it still gives me chills. From mid-January to mid-March, a typical day for Fox meant being at Paramount from 10 in the morning to 6 in the evening. For the sitcom, then heading to Universal to shoot Back to the Future from around 6:30 at night until 2:30 in the morning. Friday nights were even crazier. After taping Family Ties in front of a live audience, he would rush straight to the movie set and keep shooting until 6 or 7 in the morning. What impresses me about that is not just the stamina. It is that Fox still managed to keep that quick, bright, sly energy that Marty McFly has on screen. When you watch the film, that kid feels like he never stops moving. He runs, talks, reacts, bounces around, like he has springs in him. But behind that easy charm was a life that almost did not have nights anymore. That is the very real side of Hollywood back then, that audiences rarely got to see. All that bright light up front was often paid for by a brutally demanding machine behind the curtain. And what feels even more unbelievable to me is that in a movie already squeezed that hard, the ending we all remember today was once completely different. Fact 15. The original climax was not the clock tower, but a nuclear test site in Nevada. At first, the ending of Back to the Future was not the now iconic clock tower ending we all know. It was actually a nuclear test site in Nevada. Can you imagine that, a nuclear explosion sending the DeLorean back to the future? It sounds kind of messy, doesn't it? So why did they change it? The simple reason is that a nuclear test site did not really fit the spirit of the movie. They needed something more personal, more memorable, and more importantly, something that carried an emotional surprise. And so, instead of one huge explosion, the clock tower became the symbol of the film. It was not just a physical structure, but a symbol of time of change and of a new beginning. But what do you think? If they had kept the bomb ending, would this movie still have become a part of film history? The way it did, the ending might have been different, but that clock tower created a legend we are never going to forget. Fact 14. Disney once thought the Marty and Lorraine angle was too sensitive. You probably would not expect this, but Disney really did think the Marty and Lorraine angle in Back to the Future was too sensitive. They could not understand why there would be a scene where a mother is attracted to her own son, even if it was meant as a comic situation. And yes, Disney wanted it changed. That sounds crazy, doesn't it? Where did Disney's sense of humor and boldness go? We nearly ended up with a different version of Back to the Future, one where Marty was not just Lorraine's son, but some kind of alien hero too. Who would have guessed that? So honestly, I can only be thankful Disney did not get its way, and that the film kept that odd offbeat quality. Otherwise, it might not even have been Back to the Future anymore. It would have turned into a completely different story. Fact 13. Michael J. Fox almost was not Marty McFly. Can you imagine? Back to the Future without Michael J. Fox. I am not kidding, because that very nearly happened. Eric Stoltz really did play Marty McFly during the first 4 weeks of filming, but it was not working. Stoltz was talented, no question, but he was too serious for the part. Just picture a Marty McFly without Fox's goofy humor, without those quick little reactions, without that light playful spark opposite Doc Brown. After 4 weeks, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale realized Stoltz was not bringing the vibe they needed for Marty. They had to reshoot everything with Fox, and that pushed the schedule back by a full month. And honestly, I cannot imagine this movie without Michael J. Fox. He brought something very specific to it, something sweet and funny that really only Fox could give the role. I truly feel lucky this movie ended up with Fox. Stoltz may have been good, but Marty McFly could only ever be Michael J. Fox. Fact 12. Michael J. Fox did not have to learn skateboarding for Back to the Future. There is a rumor I hear people repeat all the time, that Michael J. Fox only started learning to skateboard after he decided to do Back to the Future, kind of like Tom Cruise learning to ride a motorcycle just because of Top Gun. But that is not true. Fox was actually already a pretty good skateboarder back in high school. Still, for some of the more complicated scenes, like skating over rocky ground, or chasing after a car, Per Willinder, a professional skateboarder, stepped in for Fox on the tougher shots. And honestly, nobody wanted to see Marty McFly wipe out on a skateboard. Every time I watch Marty's skateboard scenes, I always think Fox really pulled that off beautifully. Those moments give the character a natural charm that is hard to fake. And without Willinder helping out on the rougher parts, Marty McFly might not have looked nearly that cool. Fact 11. The audience did not even know they were watching a comedy. There is one thing I always remember whenever I think about Back to the Future. No, not the writers or the cast, like in those earlier facts. This time, it is about the audience. Yes, that means you. When the film was first screened for a test audience, they had no idea they were watching a comedy. People sat there in total silence, completely serious. And when Einstein got sent through time, the whole theater suddenly went quiet because they thought something terrible was about to happen to the dog. The audience had no idea they were watching a comedy, so they just sat there waiting for something serious and dramatic. Then, once everything turned out fine, they realized they had been worrying for nothing, and suddenly the laughter broke out all through the theater. That feeling must have been unforgettable. The movie delivered a kind of humor nobody saw coming at first. And that exact feeling is part of what makes this film so special. Looking back now, we all know Back to the Future is a comedy, but back then, nobody saw it that way. And at that point, nobody knew it was going to become a classic either. Fact 10. Crispin Glover's real anxiety accidentally created the perfect George McFly. When you think of George McFly, you probably picture an awkward, shy young man who is a little clumsy now and then. Right. But what is so interesting is that those very traits came out of a surprisingly real truth. Crispin Glover, the actor playing George, was genuinely nervous and uneasy through much of the shoot. In reality, Glover was so anxious that he had to keep repeating his lines in his head, and there were moments when he felt like he could not get out from under that tension. And did you ever notice that his anxiety became one of the key things that made George feel so perfect to the audience? That is what is so special about Glover's performance. That real uneasiness created a George McFly who feels human, believable, and deeply real. The kind of guy almost anybody can relate to. Those scenes where George cannot quite stand still, where his eyes look a little uneasy, where his movements feel awkward, none of that came only from an actor's imagination. That was Glover's actual anxiety brought to the screen in a natural and strangely lovable way. And maybe that very awkwardness is exactly what made George McFly into a character people never forgot. And in the end, I just want to give Crispin Glover his due, because he gave us a terrific George McFly. Thank you for creating a George McFly who truly feels alive in the hearts of fans. Fact 9. Even Buddhist monks loved Marty McFly. You may not expect this, but Michael J. Fox was actually recognized as Marty McFly in a remote forest in Bhutan. Definitely not the place you would expect to run into Marty McFly, right? A group of Buddhist monks happened to pass by and called out his name right away. A group of people from a faraway country who did not know him personally, and yet they recognized him as Marty McFly. That is the power of an iconic role, isn't it? That is the thing about Marty McFly. He became part of a cultural legacy you just cannot erase. And honestly, this may be one of the best examples of how a single role can carry you anywhere, even all the way to Bhutan. Fact 8. 3 hours of makeup to become Lorraine McFly. Here is something I am willing to bet you did not know. Turning Lea Thompson into Lorraine McFly took more time in makeup than anything else in the shooting schedule. 3 hours of makeup every single day. And I am not talking about wounds or wild special effects makeup either, just to make her look like a 47-year-old mother. Truthfully, I have to admit, if it were me, I probably would have fallen asleep in that chair every single time. But Lea was incredibly patient and absolutely delivered in the role. And even after spending that much time in the makeup chair, she still played Lorraine in a way that felt natural and full of emotion. She deserves every bit of praise she gets. Fact 7. George McFly and peanut brittle. Do you remember what George McFly is usually eating at dinner? Peanut brittle? Not exactly anything special, but there was actually a hidden meaning behind it. That moment with George eating peanut brittle was not random at all. In a deleted scene, George is actually pressured into buying a whole case of peanut brittle as a way of showing that he is the kind of person who gets pushed around and has no real voice in the family. Little details like that are part of what makes Back to the Future stand out. The whole movie is not just about time travel adventures. It is also full of small human character details, from a simple snack like peanut brittle to those funny and oddly sweet little moments. Fact 6. Tom Wilson and the strange postcard. If you are one of those truly die-hard Back to the Future fans, then you have probably dreamed of meeting the cast at some point. But did you ever imagine that Tom Wilson, the man who played Biff Tannen, had a very unusual way of dealing with the endless questions from fans? Instead of answering the same questions over and over until he was worn out, Tom Wilson came up with a pretty funny solution. When he met fans, rather than repeating the same old answers, he handed them a postcard with the frequently asked questions already on it. Pretty convenient, right? One move, and that takes care of all the usual questions about the movie. Fact 5. Burger King and Toys R Us showed up in the movie, but not as product placement. You have probably seen Back to the Future dozens of times, and every time Burger King or Toys R Us shows up, you probably figured that was just standard product placement, right? Well, believe it or not, the truth is very different. Neither one was there as product placement. It was simply a coincidence during filming. And that is kind of amazing. Back then, Hollywood was always slipping major brands into movies to help boost revenue and protect the bottom line. But in Back to the Future, director Robert Zemeckis had no deal in place with Burger King or Toys R Us at all. The reality is, those stores showed up simply because they were common locations around the filming area, and it happened naturally. But instead of turning them into advertisements, Zemeckis let them exist in the background in a way that felt organic, almost like they were just part of everyday life in the story. So, what do you think? Should Hollywood go back to that more natural way of doing things without turning every background store into an ad? That is actually a pretty good question. Fact 4. Michael J. Fox and the Children Who Never Watched Back to the Future. Can you believe this? Michael J. Fox, the man who became a legend because of Marty McFly, admitted that his 4 children had never watched Back to the Future. And the funny part is, he said this out loud at London Comic-Con in 2015. At that event, Fox admitted that even though he had become a huge part of movie culture because of Back to the Future, his 4 children, 1 son and 3 daughters, had never seen the movie. Why not? Maybe they just felt Dad has probably seen enough of it already, what is left for us to watch. Just imagine that. While the whole world is in love with this movie, Michael J. Fox's kids just see him as a regular dad. Maybe to them, Marty McFly is just one little part of family life. And honestly, that makes sense. Who really wants to sit around watching their dad be a movie star? Either way, the fact that Michael J. Fox's children had never watched Back to the Future somehow makes the whole story even more special. He may be a legend to the world, but to his own family, he is still just Dad. And I think that makes Fox feel more relatable and more lovable than ever. Fact 3. A Hollywood blockbuster finished post-production in just 9.5 weeks. Normally, a Hollywood blockbuster is not put together in a rush. Once filming wraps, studios usually spend months, sometimes even a full year on post-production. That is the stage where editors shape every scene. The sound team fine-tunes every little effect, and the visual effects people polish the final details before the movie hits theaters. But Back to the Future took a very different road. From the day filming wrapped to the day the movie officially opened, the entire post-production process lasted only 9.5 weeks. Not even 2.5 months to edit the film, fix the sound, complete the effects, and get it ready for release. For a major studio movie in 1985, that amount of time was almost insane. Fact 2. The biggest movie in America in 1985. By the summer of 1985, Back to the Future was no longer just a fun science fiction movie. It had become a genuine box office phenomenon. Week after week, audiences kept coming back to theaters, sold-out showings, long lines stretching outside. And then, the final result became official. Back to the Future was the highest-grossing domestic film in all of America for the entire year of 1985. And remember, that year was not exactly short on big movies. Hollywood was on fire at that point. But in the end, the story of a skateboard kid and an eccentric scientist in a time-traveling DeLorean rose above all of them. What is so interesting is that this success did not come from giant effects or massive battle scenes. It came from humor, warmth, and a story that almost anybody could connect with. And when a movie wins over audiences and dominates the box office like that, what usually happens next? Hollywood starts realizing it did not just make a successful movie. It made a film with real staying power. And that brings us to the final fact on this list, an honor not every film gets to receive. Fact 1. The movie was honored by the Library of Congress, and here it is, something I am genuinely proud to share with you. Back to the Future, the movie all of us love, was officially added to the National Film Registry of the Library of Congress in December of 2007. This was no longer just a movie that once set off a box office frenzy. It had been recognized as part of the cultural legacy of cinema, a work with undeniable cultural, historical, and aesthetic importance. The reason this film earned a place in the National Film Registry was not just because of the fun details we have been uncovering throughout this journey. It was because of the perfect blend of a timeless story, vivid characters, and iconic scenes that became part of popular culture itself. So, the next time you think about this movie, remember that Back to the Future is not just a lovable film. It is a cultural icon, an enduring legacy. And if you have loved it, then you have already become part of its story, part of the legend. Everybody says they want to travel through time, but if you think about it a little more carefully, what we really want is not the machine. We just want to go back to some moment, some old day, some old conversation, some person we wish we had spent a few more minutes with. Maybe that is the real reason. Back to the Future has always felt so special to me. It is not just a science fiction movie. It is a story about family memory and second chances. If you love behind-the-scenes stories and classic movies like this, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because we still have a lot more great movie journeys ahead of us.